Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, we used to talk a great deal about Georgia, the elections in Georgia, and this strange French woman who was parachuted into Georgia, Salome Zurabichvili, who declared that she wasn't going to leave the office of president because she just didn't accept the legitimacy of the election of the president who was supposed to replace her. So she said she was going to stay in the presidential palace, come what may. However, I think cooler heads prevailed, and she did indeed leave, but only to get a nice, cushy job at the McCain Institute, which is exactly the right place for her. And so we thought, okay, well, that's that. It's a ancient history now. But it turns out that Georgia is very much on the mind of American lawmakers. And unbeknownst to many, I mean, other than people who actually follow these things closely, there is now a piece of legislation wending its way through Congress. It's now been overwhelmingly voted upon by the House of Representatives, and so it's now heading to the Senate, imposing sanctions on Georgia. Because Georgia
For voting the wrong way.
for voting the wrong way, and that's the way democracy is supposed to work. If you vote,
Well, George,
either you cancel an election and keep rerunning the elections, or if you can't, if you've managed to avoid the cancellation, then you punish the countries for having voted the wrong way.
well, the stand-in character known as Marco Rubio playing the cosplay roles of National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. Do you remember the interview he gave to Megyn Kelly? Oh yeah, that was kind of cool, kind of highfalutin. We great power politics, hegemony has its limits. Said all the good things. I mean, he's not a bad public speaker, but is the State Department going to get behind this legislation if it passes? Is Donald Trump going to?
Well, that's exactly
I
it.
mean, and if both these characters do, then we got John McCain.
Well, we don't know. I mean, that's what we don't yet know. I mean, we know that it passed overwhelmingly in the House. So here's a story in this publication known as OC, which is lavishly funded by the United States, and the EU get all sorts of money from USAID and National Endowment for Democracy and European. So here's their article. It says U.S. House passes MEGOBARI Act. And
you're not serious.
it's
When
called
I didn't even know how to pronounce it.
MEGOBARI. That's it. It's MEGOBARI. And it says after roughly a year of legislative limbo, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the MEGOBARI Act, putting the bill one step closer to becoming law. The act calls for sanctions against the ruling Georgian Dream Party for democratic backsliding in the country, i.e., they won an election.
Well, again, isn't it really kind of curious? So you have for the Georgians, you have a foreign government sanctioning a political party.
Yes,
What business do they have in doing that? Now, usually it's to punish a government,
right,
okay?
right.
But they're very explicit. They against the ruling Georgian Dream Party. That's very peculiar,
That's
George.
right. Anyway, the bill is called Mobilizing and Enhancing Georgia's Options for Building Accountability, Resilience, and Independence.
Or said differently, get in line.
That's right. It received overwhelming support across party lines, 349 members of the House in favor, 42 voting against. And as we'll find, of that 42, 34 are the MAGA. That's the 34. That's the hardcore MAGA. 8 are some Democrats. So it's that's the 42. 34 MAGA, 8 Democrats. And the act was first introduced by Republican Representative Joe Wilson, amidst widespread protests against Georgia's controversial foreign agent law in May 2024. So you remember that we did a number of podcasts about that, and
Well, I
we
mean, George, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing controversial about it.
I don't think so. Hungary is in the process now of passing something similar, and pressure is already building up on Hungary. How dare you pass anything like this? It's called, I think, Transparency in Public Life Act, because how dare you insist on transparency? How dare you try to inquire about foreign money and foreign influence in your political system? Let's remember, these are all people who spend all their time screaming about Russia, 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 Russian interference, but apparently the EU and the United States are perfectly within their rights to interfere and send lots and lots of money into other countries' political processes. Wilson directly attacked the ruling Georgian Dream Party on the House floor, calling it illegitimate and thugs, while arguing the Georgian government is subordinate to the American-hating mafia cabal. It's very strange because I don't get the impression the Georgians are particularly America hating, but
No, they're very pro-American,
they tend to be quite pro-American. They just don't really want to get pushed into a war with Russia.
like they did under Saakashvili.
Exactly. In comments on the floor as the bill was being debated, a Republican Representative Brian Mast emphasized it was not an attack on the Georgian people, highlighting the prevalence of pro-US sentiment in Georgia. So
Yeah, well, the Caesar Act was not against the Syrian people.
we love
It-
the Syrian people, absolutely adore them, and in much the same way we love the Georgian people.
Oh, they love the Russian people too.
Absolutely adore. We love them. Tolstoy, we can't get enough of it. Tchaikovsky, we can't. I have Tchaikovsky playing it at home all the time. um, Unfortunately, our bilateral relationship with Georgia has been eroded by the ruling Georgian Dream Party's moves that mimic Russia's authoritarian tactics, as well as their rapprochement with China and Iran. So somehow you're punishing them because of their friends, or not even friends. They have what relations, diplomatic, economic relations. I mean, what are they doing wrong? Because they have a rapprochement with China and Iran. Mast said, arguing that the bill seeks to support the Georgian people by punishing rogue officials who are taking them further away from the U.S.
The same, the same rogue officials that were democratically elected, presumably.
And then here we have Representative Warren Davidson, one of the 34 Republicans who voted against the bill, said it was wrong-headed and argued that the American people did not send us here to expand America's security blanket to more parts of the world. We don't want to get involved in every conflict we are invited to, and we certainly don't need to seek out extra ones. This is so outrageous, such an outrageous thing to say. Davidson called the America First ideology associated with President Donald Trump. Notice they call it ideology in about this pejorative way, that America First ideology, not to want to
Well,
get
we could only wish it was because it changes from day to day what America First is,
well.
depending on who
I
you
mean,
ask.
but in this case, I mean, these people, at least they name America first. In other words, we're only pursuing what's in America's interest. We're not trying to run the rest of the world. That's, I think, something different when Nikki Haley says, I'm America first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
America first everywhere, all the time.
Exactly. And the saying that while he wishes the Georgian people well, there were more pressing concerns at home. Several key Democrats also voted against the MEGOBARI Act, including all 4 members of the so-called Squad. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. And here is this glorious act, and it says this act to counter the influence of the Chinese Communist Party, the Iranian regime, and the Russian Federation in the nation of Georgia. And so that is called the MEGOBARI Act. And then it says it's a sense of Congress that the progress made by the people of Georgia in forging an innovative and productive society since the country's independence from the Soviet Union should be applauded. The consolidation of democracy in Georgia is critical for regional stability and United States national interests.
Well, it seems to me that it has consolidated. I mean,
Yes.
and what's wrong with its democracy? I mean, this French woman, she seems to be against democracy. She doesn't vacate the premises after an election.
In the name of
It
democracy.
did not prove to have any major irregularities
No,
attached.
no, that's right. And that was the remarkable thing in Georgia. She made all these allegations about Russian interference, Russia, and then she promised she would deliver evidence. And then she finally said, "Well, I don't have any evidence, but it's not my job to find evidence." Okay. I mean, so you made a lot of allegations. You don't have the evidence. You say, "Well, it isn't my job to go around looking for evidence." Not unlike what the Romania. Where's your evidence that the Russians interfered in the Romanian presidential election? It was so cunningly affected, this Russian interference, that we haven't found any evidence of it. That just proves that Russians were involved because they're so masterful. They eliminated all traces of their interference.
Yeah, and Durov of Telegram says there, and this is my word, ample evidence of French influence found.
Absolutely, yes, yes. And he's saying, yeah, I was approached directly by this person. And he has said, I'm ready to go testify before the Romanian Constitutional Court. Um, and then Georgia has seen significant democratic backsliding in recent years, as evidenced by numerous independent assessments.
You know, okay, we could just go back just for a second here. It doesn't go amiss that Democratic backsliding. Well, you could say Democrat Party backsliding in the United States, having three rigged primaries in a row. I mean, who's backsliding here? Okay.
That's right.
Sorry, I did, you could just say Democrat backsliding, and, you can be confused which country you're talking about.
Right. Yes. Yes. I mean, the scandals in the United States are legion. I mean, just even what happened in last year in the election. So, the current Georgian government is increasingly hostile towards independent domestic civil society. And
Independent,
yes,
independent.
independent. In other words, they're on the EU US payroll. Now, what they're hostile is people using violence, and that's what has happened. This what they call civil society in Georgia. They all engaged in violence, and that was always the objective, to engage in violence and provoke the authorities. And to independent domestic civil society and its chief Euro-Atlantic partners, while increasingly embracing enhanced ties with the Russian Federation, People's Republic of China, and other anti-Western authoritarian regimes.
Remember, everyone, that Georgia has not in Europe, it's not on the Atlantic. Okay, just as a footnote.
Yes. No, it's not in the Western Hemisphere, oddly enough. And the United States has an interest in protecting and securing democracy in Georgia.
I'm sure there was absolutely. I'm convinced that there were similar bills exactly the same way, except for it was about Ukraine.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, there were. There absolutely were. Yeah. And the secretary should suspend the United States Georgia Strategic Partnership Commission, established through the United States Georgia Charter on Strategic Partnership on January the 9th, 2009. So that's still from the George W. Bush era.
Yeah.
until after the government of Georgia takes measures to represent the democratic wishes of the citizens of Georgia.
It's interesting that that strategic partnership was established in 2009, months after they were licking their wounds from Saakashvili's ill-fated attack on South Ossetia.
Ill-fated, which and undertaken with the encouragement of the Bush administration. And the Bush administration, 2008, that's when they pushed for Ukraine, Georgia membership in NATO in the Bucharest Declaration. And then, of course, Saakashvili seized that opportunity by the Beijing Olympics, but he knew he had to deal with this problem to get into NATO. He had to eliminate any conflicts on Georgian territory, otherwise he wouldn't qualify for NATO membership. And to uphold its constitutional obligation to advance the country towards membership in the European Union and NATO. I love it when other countries are telling different countries what their constitutional obligations are. I really need to be told by the United States what my constitutional obligation is.
Well, it's very similar to what the Soviet Union had to say about members of the Warsaw Pact. Okay, I mean, we'll decide that for you, what
Yes,
direction your foreign policy and security policies are. The United States is just duplicating it here.
that's right. That's right. Um, and then says statement of policy. It is the policy of the United States to support the constitutionally stated aspirations of Georgia to become a member of the European Union and NATO. But you always wonder, well, isn't it up to the people of Georgia to decide how far and how fast they want to move towards membership of the EU and NATO? Now, they've obviously decided to put on the back burner negotiations for the EU. And they said, yeah, we're going to postpone that. That is kind of what any government has to make that decision of its own. It's within the jurisdiction of any government whether it's a good idea or not to pursue membership of an organization. And same thing with Yanukovych. It was up to Yanukovych as the elected president of Ukraine to make that call whether it was a good idea to join this association agreement. But apparently, that, as in the case of Yanukovych, that wasn't it's his responsibility to make that decision. So here, it's up to us to decide how far and how fast you can join the European Union and NATO. And it's supported by the overwhelming majority of the citizens of Georgia. So why did they vote for the Georgian Dream? To continue supporting the capacity of the government of Georgia to protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity from further Russian aggression or encroachment within its internationally recognized borders.
Well, I mean, George, this is one of the reasons why the Georgia Dream is kind of backpedaling because it wants to protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Right.
What this bill, I mean, read between the lines, they want Georgia, a very small, a very poor country, to be another front against Russia,
Exactly.
a country that is vastly larger in every sense of the word. And they already parlayed in August 2008, and the Georgians decided it's better to have the Russians, not as friends, but certainly not as enemies. And this is what this bill wants. You must have Russia as an enemy and no Chinese investment. Thank you
That's
very much.
that's right. That's right. That's the thing. I mean, why this is so irresponsible? Because what they're doing here is exactly what they did in Ukraine, which is you're encouraging somebody else to fight your wars for you. The United States is not going to go to war on behalf of Georgia against Russia. We know this. You're not going to send any troops in there. You're not going to fight Russia on behalf of Georgia. You're egging on Georgia to fight a war that will result in exactly the same disaster as the war in 2008 did. So you're just simply egging them on into a suicidal conflict. So to continue supporting the government of Georgia to protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity from further Russian aggression. Again, height of irresponsibility.
Well, I mean, what's been happening is slowly but surely the Georgia-Russia relationship is being repaired slowly,
Right.
and it's primarily around trade, commerce,
Yeah.
people-to-people contacts. Okay, the Georgia Dream. Look, everyone, there's no pro-Russia party in
Right.
Georgia.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
this doesn't exist. Is realpolitik? Does that exist? Yes, it does, for very good reasons.
That's right. And then to call on all political parties and elected members of parliament in Georgia to continue working on addressing the reform plan outlined by the European Commission to resume Georgia's recently granted candidate status through an inclusive and transparent consultation
Transparent,
process.
transparent. Oh
I
yeah.
always love it, inclusive and transparent. Now, the one thing you don't do, and is transparent. Georgia passes a transparency law, and the United States and the EU immediately demand, how dare you demand transparency? So that's exactly the opposite, that you don't do any transparency here. But I love it that the European Commission sets out these plans. So and all in the name of sovereignty, sovereignty. So you must allow the European Commission to run your country for you in the name of sovereignty. To reevaluate its relationship with the government of Georgia and review all forms of foreign and security assistance made available to the government if it takes the required steps. To
So
reorient.
the Georgian government is tasked with fixing potholes and picking up garbage, and
Mhm.
but nothing to do with anything that's
No,
important. Like
no.
it's where
Na- National
its
security.
geopolitical position in the
That's
neighborhood.
and then to reorient itself towards the European Union accession agenda and to advance policy legislation reflecting the express wishes of the Georgian people, which of course we know what they are. And then to emphasize the importance of contributing to international effort to combat Russian aggression, including through sanctions on trade with Russia and the implementation of an enforcement of a worldwide sanctions on Russia. And
So
then
this
again,
is about Georgia, or is it about Ukraine here? I lost.
and to continue supporting the ongoing development of democratic values in Georgia, including free and fair elections, freedom of association, an independent and accountable judiciary, an independent media, public sector transparency and accountability. None of that. You have no interest in any of that. I mean, it's all, independent media. In other words, we're going to run the media. We're going to run all these civil society programs. The judiciary, we're going to run the judiciary just like they ran the judiciary in Ukraine. Everything's going to be run by us, but it's all in the name of democratic accountability.
I really wish those would be applied to America.
That I need to continue to support the Georgian people and civil society organizations that reflect the aspirations of the Georgian people for democracy and a future with the people of Europe. And then to continue supporting the right of Georgian people to freely engage in peaceful protests. Exactly what they weren't doing. Determine their future and independent and sovereign choices on foreign and security policy, and to call on all political parties, elected members of Parliament of Georgia, to respect freedom of peaceful assembly. No, everything's always peaceful. Whenever it's always peaceful. They're burning cars, burning buildings, but it's always peaceful. And then to call on the government of Georgia to release all persons detained or imprisoned on politically motivated grounds and drop any pending charges against them. To call on the government of Georgia to thoroughly investigate all allegations emerging from the recent national elections, which took place in October 2024, make a determination whether the elections should be judged as illegitimate and hold those responsible for interference in the elections. So notice what they're trying to do. They're actually saying you are to declare your own elections to be illegitimate, just in order to keep in with us. To just simply announce, yeah, they were illegitimate, and so we're going to just annul them, and we'll bring back Zorabishvili to be our president. To continue impressing upon the government of Georgia that the United States is committed to sustaining and deepening bilateral relations. And then, and so this is what.
Again, George, go back. You didn't finish the sentence here. Okay. Supporting Georgia's Euro Atlantic. How many times do you have to say this in a document?
That's right. Supporting Euro-Atlanticist
How many times
aspiration.
do you have to say that?
This,
George, just a quick one. What is the national security interest of Georgian American foreign policy?
well, Georgia is on the eastern part of the Black Sea. I mean, the United States already kind of controls the western part of the Black Sea, and they want to control the eastern part of the Black Sea. They have no other interest at all in Georgia.
No, but so, so the type of government that Georgia has a major impact on American strategic thinking. Oh, it's not about Georgia, it's about Russia. Sorry.
Right. And of course, it's about Russia because that's exactly their aim. They aim to turn the Black Sea into a NATO lake. That's the only their only interest in any of these countries is how to use them against Russia. It's like they're only in Moldova. I mean, why do they go on about Moldova and Maya Sandu, and they're always fating Maya Sandu? They have no interest in Maya Sandu. They have no interest in Moldova, very poor country. They want to use it against Russia. That's their only interest, and obviously to use it as a transshipment hub for arms to Ukraine. That's their interest. The whole democracy and whatever in Moldova. No, that's and so the same
Well,
thing.
Moldova has Black Sea ambitions too.
Right. That's right. So it's a Black Sea. But the interest is, as always, hey, let's surround Russia with hostile NATO states, and let's hope, and Russia doesn't notice, or if it does notice, it'll be provoked into a war that's going to drag on and lead to a bleeding of Russia. That's the plan. That was always the plan. Either they just do it and eliminate Russia as any kind of a great power, or they provoke Russia into a debilitating war. That's their goal. I mean, that's the goal in Ukraine. It's exactly the goal in Georgia, and that's why they push for this. And contrary to Angela Merkel, oh well, I oppose the Bush plan. You didn't oppose the Bush plan. You went along with it. I mean, the Bush plan was immediate, essentially,
Yeah,
NATO accession.
And the Germans said they compromised on the language, eventual.
Eventually. But they put that into the Bucharest Declaration, and it has been put in every single NATO declaration ever since. It's not like, oh well, I just did it in that one time in 2008. Every single NATO declaration since 2008 said Ukraine and Georgia will be members of NATO.
And we have the EU summit, I'm sorry, NATO summit coming up, and don't be surprised, everyone. You're going to hear it again.
Right. And then so report on Russian intelligence assets in Georgia. Not later than 180 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the Secretary of State, in coordination of the Director of National Intelligence, Secretary of Defense, shall submit to the appropriate committees of Congress a classified report prepared consistent with the protection of sources and methods, examining the penetration of Russian intelligence elements and their assets in Georgia. That includes an annex examining Chinese influence and potential intersection of Russian-Chinese cooperation in Georgia.
Well, prepared consistent with the protection of sources and methods. Well, that means they can write anything they want.
And even if they don't deliver, and they basically say, well, we don't really have, I know it's pretty routine. These people in Congress will say, whoa, that was a pretty devastating report. But unfortunately, it's classified, and we can't reveal all the horrific details that the Director of National Intelligence revealed to us.
And they need an annex examining
The Chinese influence. And then inadmissibility of officials of government of Georgia and certain other individuals involved in blocking Euro-Atlantic integration. What do you stop blocking Euro-Atlantic integration? You're just getting in the way, just like like you're blocking the door. You just would get out of the way. Not later than 90 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the president shall determine whether each of the following foreign persons has knowingly engaged in significant acts of corruption or acts of violence or intimidation in relation to the blocking of Euro-Atlantic integration in Georgia. Any individual who on or after January the 1st, 2014, I'm trying to figure out why did they pick that date? I mean, maybe has served as a member of parliament or the government of Georgia or as a current or former senior official of a Georgian political party. Any individual who is serving as an official or a leadership position working on behalf of the government of Georgia, including law enforcement, blah, 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 intelligence,
Well,
judicial.
this is a real dragnet.
It is a dragnet, yeah. And then imposition of sanctions with respect to undermining peace, security, stability, sovereignty, or territorial integrity of Georgia.
Pretty thorough.
I mean, so far, the only threats to the stability, sovereignty, and peace in Georgia is the United States and the European Union. You want to drag Georgia into an absolutely an unnecessary conflict with Russia. You're undermining its domestic institutions, and you're putting forward the Euro-Atlantic agenda that clearly the Georgians have voted. Well, not really very keen on it right now. In general, the president may impose the sanctions described and shall impose the sanctions described in this. With respect to each foreign person, the president determines on or after the date of the enactment of this act, and then is responsible for complicity and has directly or indirectly engaged in or attempted to engage in actions or policies, including ordering, controlling, or otherwise directing acts that are intended to undermine peace, stability, sovereignty, and so on. And then more sanctions, broader corruption. There's a lot of corruption in Georgia. The president shall determine whether there are foreign persons who, on or after the date of the enactment of this act, have engaged in significant corruption in Georgia or acts that are intended to undermine peace, stability, security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. That's the act passed overwhelmingly by the House, and doubtless it will be passed overwhelmingly by the Senate. And then we'll see what Trump will do. I mean, the votes could well be there to, if he vetoes it, are there to override his veto. I mean, they look like huge margins, and it's just an amazing thing. These things just have this momentum of their own.
Yeah.
The Georgians, they had their elections. They decided which way they want to go. They have a parliament. They have a president. And here's the United States says, no, you don't have a right to do that. We will decide what's going to happen to you.
Well, one thing that is possible, would be unlikely, but it is possible, is that there'll be Georgia will realign in some way, shape, or form with Russia.
It could be.
Yeah, it's not. Look, I mean, it's a very complicated thing, and we don't have time to go into it. But I mean, Georgia-Russia relations, people to people, they're fine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Georgians don't hate Russians, and Russians certainly don't hate Georgians. Okay. There are millions of Georgians in Russia. George and I have talked at great length about elite capture. This is what we're talking about. The Saakashvili generation captured and parachuted back in, and we've seen the effects ever since. After 2008 was a huge shock. It was a trauma for Georgia. Yeah, it would be a little country, okay? And then you have your American friends, quote unquote, egging you on, and it spelled disaster. It's one of the interesting elements of the collapse of the Soviet Union is that we have all of these frozen conflicts. George and I got to go through the entire history of Georgia, but you had, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, for example, they were frozen. The killing stopped.
Right.
The ethnic cleansing stopped. And And through use of force, Saakashvili wanted to force the issue. Yeah, well, it forced it, and it created political facts on the ground, which it made impossible for someone to say, "Hey, look, we're a little country. Our big neighbor is a very important trading partner for us. Okay, we have to get along. There isn't a huge cultural difference between the two. They have different national histories, of course. Okay, and what about the Stalin era? Yeah, well, who made out well during the Stalin era? Okay, who? Give me, And so, the Georgians are going to be faced with hard choices. I mean, if they're going to lose complete sovereign control of their country and then be put in the front line for a confrontation with Russia again, there are going to be voices say, this is just an untenable path for us to go down. For what? And being an EU candidate, well, you can be an EU candidate for a very, very long. The EU might collapse before your candidacy is accepted. Okay.
No, that's exactly right. They're dangling these kind of candidacies um, precisely in order to take over these countries and with a view to provoking conflicts with Russia. That's the only interest. I mean, their only interest in Georgia is obviously they want to have a nice location for their forces in the eastern Black Sea, or in lieu of that, to provoke yet another war with Russia. Now, the interesting thing is, after 2008, is that the Georgians have pretty much figured out that's the plan, and they said we don't want to we don't want to go on with this plan. We don't, that's why all these attempts, and these were huge attempts. The civil society programs that they've run in Georgia are just mind-boggling. How many NGOs there are in this tiny country? I mean, it's
Yeah,
staggering.
it's a small country, and you throw all the NGOs
And
in,
the NGOs,
and
and
it's standing room only, everybody.
exactly, and the only goal of this is to create this what they call pro-Western, but in reality, an anti-Russian government that will cooperate with NATO and provoke another conflict with Russia. That's the only goal. And the Georgians said we don't want to do that,
Well,
and
in
and now
George,
they're getting punished for it.
they have a quote unquote sufficient anti-Russian government already. Georgia Dream is not pro-Russia, okay, at all. As a matter of fact, they're extremely standoffish, and they realize small countries have to be very careful.
Right,
And it's better to get along with your
right,
neighbors because, ask the Armenians.
right,
You can disappear. You can be disappeared.
right.
And it's a tough neighborhood. And then the juxtaposition is the Russians are saying, look, for reasons of, are we going to resolve our differences? Probably not. Okay. But for reasons of trade, we like your wine, we like your cuisine, you know,
Right,
maybe better to have flights again. I mean, just for that purpose.
right.
And then the Chinese are saying, we're investing all over the place. We'd like to invest in your country. Yeah, well, that would be great. Okay, because our American friends are threatening us with everything but the kitchen sink. And the Chinese say, we're not interested in any of that.
Right.
Okay, at all. Okay. I
No,
mean,
I think that's
you're
the
you're you're
that's
you're you're not making it a hard choice.
no, I think that's the real problem with all these um, policies that they're hoping to bring countries to their knees. In other words, the Georgians will realize that life without the United States is quite painful, and there's going to be another election, and we know there's going to be another election, and we're going to do everything we can to interfere in that election and to get the result that we want. And in Georgia, look what we did in Romania. We've shown you what we can do in Romania
And
uh,
Moldova.
and Moldova. So we're going to have another shot at it. So that's what they're applying this pressure, and they're telling the Georgians, hey, you want to go down this path, life can be quite nasty. And so, and we're just going to keep applying pressure and pressure. And of course, they have their people there they bought and paid for who can be relied on to do the rent a mob, rent a riot as they did, after the last election in Georgia. So that's what they're doing. It's coercion, it's extortion, it's blackmail. The one thing it isn't is democracy.
Absolutely. What, as onerous as this act is, I'd be very curious to see what the State Department and Trump will think about it. We'll get there. But don't underestimate the Georgians. I have a lot of admiration for Georgians. I know a lot of Georgians here, okay? A lot, okay? And it's very much part of the fabric of Russian life. Armenians, Georgians, it's Ukrainians, and they've learned a lot of things, okay? And it looks like, again, 2008, it was a trauma. It was a terrible trauma. And they don't want that to happen again. And George is right. This is the path towards another 2008. And the body politic there saying, no, we don't need enemies. But we don't need friends like the Americans.
That's right. That's right. And Saakashvili is a kind of a reviled figure there. He led his country to disaster, and he's in prison now. That's so. They absolutely do not want to go back to the Saakashvili era. So, but
Zelensky, take note, Zelensky.
that's right. That's right. It's but it's just an extraordinary thing that these things just go on because this is the way the Americans are. They never really ever forget anything. They just gotta keep grinding out these things. You're not paying attention to it for 1 minute, and then right away they come back. Oh, we've got this piece of legislation, that's on the books, and we've got a veto-proof
Well,
majority on
yeah,
this legislation.
and there's this mentality is that, we put a lot of money into this project. We want some results. I mean, Georgia's a tiny country with a small population, but if you look about the machinations that the EU and the United States has invested in this very small place, it's extraordinary.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. They failed. They failed in Georgia last year. I mean, that was So remember, we kind of bookended what happened last year with Georgia, and then in Romania, then there was this election that was obviously going to be won by somebody NATO really didn't want to win. The Constitutional Court stepped in and just simply annulled an election. So they eventually managed to get what they wanted in Romania, but they failed in Georgia. And they don't like that, so that's why they want to do a do-over in Georgia. And this legislation explicitly says you have to cancel that election, just like the Romania. You need to cancel that 2024 election.
Yeah, but doesn't it send the signal, George, that if for some miraculous reason Georgia's candidacy is sped up and they make it into the European Union, that will be they'll pull a Romania. Nope, rerun the election.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's part of that's part of the deal. Okay, you joined. You're a part of the club right now, and we have our rules, and you must follow them. As long as it stays out of the European Union, they've got some wiggle room. Okay, so it's very counterintuitive thinking, but to join the club of democracies, you have to give up your democracy.
Yep. That's right. That's the prerequisite. But they have their agents in Georgia. So it's not like they don't already have people in place to try to redo elections. It just they failed to do it in December. That woman Zorabishvili, did what she could to do a rerun of that election. She failed, but they're gonna try again. They have the agents there.
Also, you see the Georgia Dream Party have a learning curve because what was the cardinal mistake that Yanukovych made? I'll make a political deal with the EU.
Yes.
And once you do that, you open the door, and then there's they'll rush you out the back, okay,
Yeah.
under threat of killing you, okay. And so, nope, they're going to say there's not going to be any redo, okay, whatsoever, because if they do, game over.
No.
It's like dominoes. Hit once you give up that one, It just goes around and you'll be obliterated.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right.
All right. How many people are watching Georgia? Well, there are two people here. Okay.
That's it. And the dogs, but their
You
own interest
see,
is in the
you
tip
see,
jar. Yeah, they just want money. I mean, yeah, we're watching Georgia. See how much money we can make on Georgia.
the I like it that way. He's having a snooze. All right, everybody. This is the Goggle with Peter and George. We're on local, so please go to thegoggle.locals.com. This is Wednesday. George will have his solo tomorrow, and God willing, I'll be okay, and we'll do another one of these on Friday.
Yes. And in the meantime, these dogs, they are getting angrier and angrier. The NGOs, civil society programs, whatever, just get money into tip jar. How many more ways can we say it? So if you have anything lying around, straight into the tip jar. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve on the technology, and above all, we just keep those dogs on a calm, even keel. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.